Michael walked to his car, passing the spot where he'd first helped David. The mall's new slogan shone above the entrance: "Everyone welcome, everyone valued." It wasn't just words, it was a promise they worked to keep every day. As he drove home, Michael thought about all the lives that had changed because of one simple choice to help someone. His mother's medical bills were paid now, his sister's college fund was secure. But more importantly, he'd helped create a place where kindness wasn't just allowed, it was expected. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help, new chances to make a difference. But that's what transformation is, not a single moment, but a continuous choice to do better, to be better, to help create the world you want to see. And it all started with one person deciding that helping others was worth any consequence. As Michael often told new employees during training, sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. You never know which moment will be the one that changes everything. 6 months later, Riverside Mall looked different. Not just in the physical changes, though there were plenty of those, but in the way it felt. The automatic doors worked smoothly now, all of them. Wide, comfortable rest areas dotted the corridors. New signs in Braille and multiple languages helped everyone navigate more easily. But the biggest change was in the people. Security guards now greeted visitors with warm smiles, trained to see themselves as helpers first, enforcers second. The pretzel stand girl had been promoted to assistant manager, implementing a new program to hire people with disabilities. The bookstore owner had transformed his shop with wider aisles and a section dedicated to books about disability rights and accessibility. Michael's office, still strange to think he had an office now, was on the ground floor with windows looking out at the mall entrance. He'd insisted on staying close to the action rather than moving to corporate headquarters. On his desk sat framed copies of thank you letters, not from corporate, but from people whose lives had been touched by the changes. Ready for the meeting? David wheeled into the office, now his regular workplace too. Together, they'd become an unstoppable team, Michael's practical experience combining perfectly with David's professional background in accessibility consulting. Today was special. They were hosting representatives from 20 other mall companies, all wanting to learn from what had become known as the Riverside model. The training room was full by 9 a.m. Michael stood at the front, still feeling a bit strange in his business casual clothes rather than a security uniform. "Welcome everyone," he began. 6 months ago, I was fired for helping someone. Today, I'm here to teach you why that was the best thing that could have happened, not just for me, but for thousands of people. He clicked to the first slide, that familiar video that had started it all. But now it was just the beginning of the story. The presentation continued with before and after photos, statistics showing increased visitor numbers, and testimonials from customers whose lives had been changed by the new policies. "Our revenue is up 30% since implementing these changes," David explained to the amazed audience. "Turns out, when you make a place accessible to everyone, everyone wants to come." The business people in the room were scribbling notes frantically. This wasn't just good PR, it was good business. During the lunch break, Michael walked through the mall, remembering his old patrol route. The teenage girl working at the phone repair kiosk was using sign language with a customer, part of the new employee training program. A mother with a child in a wheelchair easily navigated the wide corridors. An elderly man rested comfortably in one of the new seating areas, chatting with a security guard who'd stopped to check if he needed anything. The afternoon session focused on the future. Michael and David unveiled plans for a national accessibility rating system for public spaces. They showed prototype designs for new types of automatic doors, developed based on feedback from wheelchair users. But most importantly, they shared stories, hundreds of them, collected over 6 months, of lives improved by simple changes and kind actions. As the day wound down, an executive from another mall company raised his hand. "All these changes must have cost a fortune," he said, looking concerned. David smiled and pulled up a slide showing the mall's financial reports. "Actually, most of our biggest improvements didn't cost anything," he explained. "They just required changing how we think about helping people." That evening, after the visitors had left, Michael sat in his office, reading emails. One caught his eye, from a young security guard at a mall in another state, asking for advice about helping a disabled customer despite strict policies. Michael smiled as he began his response, remembering where this all started. The mall was closing for the day. The cleaning staff moved through the corridors, their carts gliding smoothly over the new flooring. In the food court, a group of employees were teaching each other basic sign language during their break. At the entrance, the automatic doors worked perfectly as the last customers left for the day. As night fell on Wednesday, the story was already being taught in business schools as a case study in corporate responsibility. Other retail companies were rushing to announce their own accessibility initiatives. What had started as one mall's PR crisis had become a turning point in how American business viewed its responsibility to the public. Back in the boardroom, long after the press had gone, the CEO sat alone, reading comments on social media. One in particular caught his eye. Today, a company learned that doing the right thing isn't just good ethics, it's good business. He smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring the real work of turning promises into practice. Wednesday morning brought the kind of corporate panic that only viral PR disasters can create. The mall's parent company, National Retail Properties, had called an emergency board meeting at their headquarters. The CEO hadn't slept in 48 hours, watching as their company's name became synonymous with heartless corporate policies. In the sleek boardroom on the 40th floor, executives stared at presentation slides showing the damage. Their stock had dropped 5% at opening. Major tenants were threatening to break their leases. The hashtag Boycott Riverside Mall was trending in 12 states. And worst of all, competing malls were using the situation to promote their own human-first policies. "Play the video again," the CEO requested, rubbing his temples. On the massive screen, they watched Michael helping David for what felt like the 100th time. In the harsh fluorescent light of the boardroom, every moment of genuine kindness felt like an indictment of their policies. The head of HR cleared her throat. "We've completed our internal review. In the past year alone, we've had 27 similar incidents where employees were disciplined for helping customers beyond their job descriptions. 6 were fired." She paused, letting that sink in. "We've been following policy, but at what cost?" Meanwhile, investigative journalists had gotten hold of the company's employee handbook. They were having a field day with sections like Procedure 47B, Unauthorized Customer Assistance, and Protocol 23, Maintaining Post Position. One reporter noted that the word security appeared 312 times in the manual, while words like help, assist, and support appeared fewer than 20 times combined. The PR team presented their findings next. "The public sees this as a symbol of everything wrong with corporate America," the director explained. "Rigid rules over human compassion. Profits over people. We're not just fighting a PR battle, we're fighting a cultural moment." In the middle of the presentation, someone turned on the news. The protests had spread to other malls owned by the company. Disability rights activists were conducting accessibility audits of their properties, documenting every barrier and broken automatic door. The results weren't pretty. "We need to do more than just damage control," the company's youngest board member spoke up. She'd been quiet until now, scrolling through social media on her tablet. "People aren't just angry, they're hurt. They're sharing decades of stories about being ignored, dismissed, or treated as inconveniences. This isn't going away with a press release." The CEO stood up, walking to the window. Below, he could see protesters gathering outside their corporate headquarters too. Their signs were visible even from 40 stories up. "Be like Michael and compassion over compliance." "Get me the disability rights organizations on the phone," he finally said. "All of them. We're not just going to fix this, we're going to lead the industry in fixing it." The room stirred with surprise. The CEO was known for being bottom-line focused, but even he could see that the bottom line was now tied to something bigger. What followed was unlike anything the company had done before. They'd brought in accessibility experts, not just to consult, but to completely rewrite their policies. They hired people with disabilities at every level, from retail to corporate. Every broken automatic door in every mall would be fixed within 48 hours. The employee handbook was torn apart and rebuilt from scratch. The new version started with a simple statement: "Our first duty is to human dignity." Security guards would now be trained in accessibility assistance. Performance reviews would include metrics for customer support, not just rule compliance. By Wednesday evening, the company was ready to make their announcement, but they didn't do it from the boardroom. Instead, they went to the protest site at Riverside Mall. The CEO walked through the crowd, faced the cameras, and began with 2 words nobody expected: "We're sorry." What followed wasn't the usual corporate speak. He admitted their policies had been wrong. He acknowledged the pain they'd caused. And then he did something unprecedented. He invited Michael and David to help shape the company's new approach to customer service and accessibility. The press conference ended with a moment that would be shared millions of times. The CEO handed Michael back his security badge, not as a regular guard, but as the new director of customer relations and accessibility. But Michael had one condition: that David would co-lead the initiative, bringing his first-hand experience to the role. Michael's phone kept buzzing with support messages, job offers, and interview requests, but one text stood out. It was from an elderly mall worker who'd watched him help people every morning for 3 years. They thought they were firing a security guard, but they didn't realize they were firing the heart of our community. By Tuesday morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. The local news van parked outside Michael's house wasn't alone. 3 national network crews had joined them. His sister peeked through the curtains, counting the reporters gathering on their front lawn. "You might want to see this," she called to Michael, who was in the kitchen making coffee. The morning news was showing footage from outside the mall. A group of people had gathered, many in wheelchairs or with mobility aids, holding signs that read, "Kindness isn't a crime," and "Humanity over policy." The protest had started small, just a few regular mall visitors who recognized Michael from the video. But it had grown quickly as disability rights organizations and local community groups joined in. The crowd now filled the parking lot, their chants clear even through the TV speakers: "Bring him back, bring him back." Michael's phone buzzed with a text from David: "Turn on Channel 7. I'm about to go live." Moments later, there was David on screen, speaking to a reporter outside the mall. He looked different in his business suit, more commanding than he had in the mall that Saturday. What that security guard did, David said, his voice steady and clear, wasn't just about helping me through a door. It was about seeing me as a person, not a problem. Do you know how many times I've had to turn back from places because of maintenance issues or technical difficulties? How many times I've been told to wait for help that never comes? The camera panned to show more supporters arriving. The bookstore owner had closed his shop to be there, holding a sign with pictures of Michael helping various customers over the years. The pretzel stand girl had brought her entire family. Even some of Michael's fellow security guards had joined the protest during their off hours, still in uniform. Local business owners started calling the news stations. A coffee shop owner offered Michael a management position. A security company downtown wanted to create a new role for him, training guards in accessibility and customer service. The owner of a rival mall called, promising better pay and a commitment to inclusive policies. But it wasn't just about job offers. People were sharing their own stories of struggling with accessibility, of being ignored or dismissed. The hashtag Humanity over Policy was trending nationwide, with similar stories pouring in from across the country. "Your story made me realize something," read one viral post from a business owner. "We've become so focused on rules and liability that we've forgotten the human element. Today, I'm rewriting our company policies. Kindness shouldn't be punishable." Around noon, disability advocacy groups held a press conference on the mall steps. Their spokesperson, a respected civil rights attorney, laid out the bigger picture. "This isn't just about one security guard or one mall. This is about how we treat people with disabilities in public spaces. It's about whether we value human dignity over rigid rules." The local Chamber of Commerce called an emergency meeting. Several major businesses threatened to pull out of the mall if the situation wasn't addressed. The mall's Yelp page was flooded with 1-star reviews, each telling stories of times Michael had helped them or condemning the management's decision. Back at Michael's house, his mother watched it all unfold with quiet pride. "You know," she said, "serving lunch to the family gathered around the TV, when you were little, you used to give away your lunch to kids who forgot theirs. Some things never change." David's daughter's video had gone viral too, inspiring other teens to share stories about their parents' struggles with accessibility. Her hashtag #MyDadShiro was filling up with emotional posts about the daily challenges faced by families dealing with disabilities. By late afternoon, competing malls in the area announced new disability awareness training programs for their staff. A National Retail Association issued a statement promising to review accessibility policies across the industry. What had started as one man losing his job had sparked a nationwide conversation about compassion in public spaces. Local churches and community centers opened their doors for town hall meetings to discuss accessibility issues. People shared stories of both discrimination and kindness, of barriers faced and bridges built. Michael was invited to speak but chose instead to listen, overwhelmed by how his simple act of helping had unleashed such a powerful response. As evening fell, the protesters were still there, their candles creating a warm glow in the darkening parking lot. They'd been joined by people from neighboring cities, some driving hours just to show support. The local pizza shops had started delivering free food to the protesters, and someone had set up a water station. That Monday evening, Michael sat at his kitchen table, staring at job listings on his laptop. His mother had made him a cup of tea, saying little but radiating support in the way only mothers can. His phone kept buzzing with messages from former coworkers, but he couldn't bring himself to read them yet. "You should see this," his younger sister said, rushing into the kitchen with her phone. She pulled up a social media post that made Michael's heart skip a beat. There he was, helping David at the mall entrance. The video, posted by a user named Coffee Shop Witness, had already gained over 100,000 views in just a few hours. The caption read, "Watch this security guard spend his time helping a disabled man navigate a malfunctioning entrance and shop for his daughter's birthday present." Sources say he was fired today for abandoning his post. Is this what we're calling abandonment now? #doing the right thing, #humanity over policy. As Michael watched the video, he saw himself through others' eyes for the first time. The careful way he'd managed the doors, the patient conversation, the genuine smiles exchanged. The comment section was exploding. "This is the kind of security guard we need more of, not less. My daughter uses a wheelchair. People like him make our lives so much better. Wait, he got fired for this? Are you kidding me? Which mall is this? They need to explain themselves." His sister scrolled through more comments. "It's not just on one platform, it's everywhere. People are sharing their own stories about you too." She showed him posts from regular mall visitors, each one sharing experiences of how he'd helped them over the years. The pretzel stand girl had posted, "He's the reason I felt safe working early mornings. He walked me to my car every night when it was dark. Can't believe they fired him for being too helpful." The bookstore owner shared, "This man once spent his lunch break helping an elderly customer carry heavy books to her car. Said his grandmother taught him to always help others. Shame on mall management for punishing kindness." Even as they watched, local news stations were picking up the story. His phone started ringing with numbers he didn't recognize, reporters wanting his side of the story. Michael declined the calls, still processing what was happening. "Look at this one," his mother said, pointing to a comment that made her eyes well up. It was from a woman who remembered how Michael had helped her autistic son during a meltdown last Christmas. Instead of calling security on them, he created a quiet space behind a display, gave the boy his own water bottle, and waited patiently until the child calmed down. The video had captured something beyond just one act of kindness. It had tapped into a deeper conversation about humanity in public spaces. People were sharing statistics about disability access, stories about being ignored or helped, debates about corporate policies versus human needs. Then, around dinner time, David's daughter posted her own video response. A tearful 16-year-old holding the tablet her father had bought that day. "This security guard didn't just help my dad buy my birthday present, he gave him dignity. Do you know how rare that is? How many times people just walk past or pretend not to see when someone needs help?" Local disability rights groups began sharing the video, adding context about the daily challenges their members faced. A wheelchair accessibility expert posted a detailed thread about how common malfunctioning automatic doors were and the impact on disabled people's independence. Michael's former co-workers started a #BringBackMichael. Photos emerged of all the community service awards he'd received, the thank you letters from shoppers, the times he'd gone above and beyond. Each new share added another layer to the story, painting a picture of someone who saw his job not as just following rules, but as serving people. By midnight, the original video had over 500,000 views. News vans were parked outside the mall, which had turned off commenting on all their social media accounts. Corporate headquarters was being flooded with calls and emails. The story had struck a nerve, becoming about more than just one security guard and one shopper. It was about what we value as a society. Michael finally turned off his phone and closed his laptop. His mother squeezed his shoulder. "Try to get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." She was right, though neither of them knew just how busy it would be, or how this viral moment would spark a movement that would change not just Michael's life, but the lives of countless others. But even as these worries crashed over him, he couldn't bring himself to regret helping David. The look of relief on the man's face, the genuine gratitude in his handshake, those were worth something. Maybe not in dollars and cents, but in the currency of human dignity. What Michael didn't know as he walked to his car was that this wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning. While he'd been in that meeting, the video of his interaction with David had been gaining momentum online. People were already asking questions, sharing their own stories, demanding answers. A storm was brewing, one that would force everyone to question what matters more, following rules or following your conscience. Monday morning felt different from the moment Michael walked into the mall. The usual warm greetings from the cleaning staff seemed muted, and a few of them wouldn't meet his eyes. Something was off, but he couldn't put his finger on what. He'd spent Sunday with his family, mostly offline, enjoying his mother's famous Sunday dinner and playing board games with his younger siblings. His radio crackled to life just as he reached his post. "Report to the management office immediately," came Mr. Wilson's voice, colder than usual. Michael's chest tightened. He knew this had to be about Saturday's incident. Still, he held his head high as he walked to the office, remembering his mother's words. "Stand tall when you know you've done right." The management office was on the 3rd floor, tucked away from the shopping areas. Usually quiet, today it was buzzing with activity. Through the glass walls, Michael could see several people in suits he'd never seen before. His palms started to sweat as he knocked on the door. "Come in," called a sharp voice. Inside, Mr. Wilson sat behind his desk, flanked by 2 corporate representatives. Their expressions were stern, and a laptop sat open between them, showing security camera footage from Saturday. "Please, take a seat," said one of the corporate representatives, a woman with thick-rimmed glasses. "I'm Mrs. Thompson from Corporate Security, and this is Mr. Baker from HR." She didn't offer to shake hands. "We need to discuss a serious violation of protocol that occurred during your shift on Saturday." The footage played on the laptop, Michael leaving his post, helping David at the doors, accompanying him through the mall. What should have been a proud moment felt twisted somehow, reduced to timestamps and security protocols. "According to our records," Mr. Baker began, shuffling through some papers, "you were away from your designated post for approximately 42 minutes. During this time, the north entrance was left completely unmonitored. Do you deny this?" Michael sat up straighter. "No, sir. I don't deny it. I helped a disabled customer who was struggling with our malfunctioning doors. I'm radioed in to report that I was stepping away." "Yes, you reported stepping away," Mrs. Thompson interrupted, "but you didn't mention you'd be gone for nearly an hour. Our protocols clearly state that security personnel must remain at their assigned posts unless responding to an immediate security threat." "The doors were malfunctioning," Michael explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "They could have injured him. Isn't that a security concern?" Mr. Wilson leaned forward. "That's what maintenance is for. We've had numerous conversations about this, haven't we? About staying at your post. About focusing on security instead of playing customer service." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but Michael could tell their minds were made up before he'd even walked in. They played more footage, showed him highlighted sections of the security protocol manual, and listed every time he'd stepped away from his post in the past month, helping the lost child find her mother, assisting the elderly man who'd fallen, guiding the visually impaired woman to the restroom. "While your intentions may have been good," Mrs. Thompson concluded, "your actions show a persistent disregard for mall security protocols. Therefore, effective immediately, your employment with Riverside Mall is terminated. The words hit like a physical blow. 3 years of service, countless thank you notes from shoppers, even a community service award from the local Chamber of Commerce, none of it mattered against the rigid rules he'd broken. As he handed over his badge and radio, the pretzel stand girl watched from her kiosk, tears in her eyes. Word had already spread through the mall's employee grapevine. The bookstore owner stepped out of his shop, looking like he wanted to say something, but security was already escorting Michael to the exit. Walking through those same doors he'd helped David navigate just 2 days ago, Michael felt numb. His mother's medical bills flashed through his mind. How would he help with those now? His little sister's college fund that he contributed to every month. All the people who counted on him. The mall was at its busiest, with weekend shoppers filling every corner. The food court was buzzing with the lunch rush, and sale signs in shop windows drew crowds of eager customers. But none of that mattered to Michael as he made his way to the malfunctioning entrance doors, where a man in a wheelchair was still struggling. As Michael got closer, he could see the frustration on the man's face. The automatic doors would open halfway, then suddenly close, making it impossible to enter safely. Several people had walked around him, using the revolving door instead, some muttering sorry as they hurried past with their shopping bags. "Hi there," Michael called out, his voice warm and steady. "Those doors have been giving us trouble all week. Let me help you out." The man looked up, relief washing over his tired face. He introduced himself as David, explaining he'd come to buy a birthday present for his daughter. The doors weren't just stuck, they were actively fighting against them. Each time they tried to move forward, the sensors would misfire, causing the doors to suddenly close. Michael positioned himself between the doors, using his body to keep them open, while carefully guiding David's wheelchair through the entrance. You'd think in 2025, something as simple as automatic doors would work properly, David said with a slight laugh, though Michael could hear the underlying frustration in his voice. "I'd actually called ahead to ask if the mall was wheelchair accessible. They said yes, but didn't mention this little surprise." "Let me know where you're headed," Michael offered, noticing David's wheelchair had gotten slightly scuffed from the door incident. "I know some shortcuts that'll make getting around easier." David mentioned he was looking for the electronics store on the second floor. As they made their way to the elevator, David shared more about his daughter's upcoming birthday. She was turning 16 and dreamed of becoming a video editor. He'd been saving up to buy her first professional editing tablet. The pride in his voice when he talked about her was unmistakable. The elevator, thankfully, was working perfectly. On their way up, Michael pointed out which paths had the best accessibility and which areas to avoid during busy hours. He'd learned these details from other wheelchair users who frequently visited the mall, though he'd never had the chance to share this knowledge so extensively before. "You know," David said as they reached the electronics store, "most people just walk past when they see someone struggling. They feel bad, maybe, but they don't stop. You didn't just stop, you actually know what you're doing." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "That makes a bigger difference than you might realize." Michael helped David navigate through the store aisles, which were thankfully wide enough for a wheelchair. The store manager, who knew Michael well, came over to assist them with finding the perfect tablet. As they wrapped up the purchase, David's whole face lit up thinking about his daughter's reaction to the gift. What neither of them noticed was the young woman sitting in the coffee shop across from the electronics store. She'd been recording the entire interaction on her phone from the moment Michael stepped out to help at the doors. She'd captured every patient gesture, every careful movement, every genuine smile exchanged between the two men. Later, as Michael walked David back to the entrance, using a different set of doors this time, they exchanged contact information. "The mall needs more people like you," David said, gripping Michael's hand firmly. "Thank you for making what could have been a frustrating disaster into a pleasant afternoon." Michael watched David leave, feeling good about having helped, but also slightly anxious about the time he'd spent away from his post. He checked his watch. Almost 40 minutes had passed. His stomach tightened as he thought about Mr. Wilson's previous warnings, but he pushed the worry aside. Sometimes doing the right thing meant facing consequences, and he'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. He didn't know it yet, but that video was already being uploaded to social media. By the end of his shift, it would begin its journey across the internet, touching hearts and sparking conversations about compassion, accessibility, and what it truly means to serve the public. The next few days would test Michael's resolve in ways he never expected, but for now, he simply returned to his post, ready to help the next person who needed him. The morning sun had barely peeked through the clouds when Michael walked into Riverside Mall, adjusting his security uniform one last time before starting his shift. He'd been working here for 3 years now, and every morning felt like coming home. The cleaning staff greeted him with warm smiles as they finished up their morning routine, and the early bird mall walkers waved as they passed by. Everyone knew Michael, not because he was the tallest or the strongest security guard, but because he was the one who always went the extra mile. "Morning, Mr. Johnson," he called out to one of the regular elderly mall walkers. The old man's face lit up as he waved back. This was the part of his job Michael loved most, making people feel seen, feel safe. At 32, Michael wasn't where he'd imagined he'd be when he was younger. He'd dreamed of becoming a nurse, following in his mother's footsteps. But life had other plans, and after his mom got sick, the security job helped pay the bills. Still, he found ways to care for people, even if it wasn't in a hospital. The mall was like its own little world. From the teenager who worked at the pretzel stand and always saved him a fresh one, to the bookstore owner who'd recommend new reads, Michael had built relationships with everyone. His coworkers often joked that he was more of a mall concierge than a security guard. "You spend too much time chatting with people," his supervisor, Mr. Wilson, had warned him last week. "Remember, you're here to maintain security, not make friends." But Michael couldn't help it, that's just who he was. His grandmother had always told him, "A little kindness costs nothing but means everything." The morning moved along as usual. He helped Mrs. Lee from the nail salon find her lost keys. They'd fallen behind a planter, guided a confused tourist to the right store, and even spent his break helping the new janitor learn how to operate the floor cleaning machine. Each small act of kindness made the massive mall feel more like a community. But around noon, something happened that would change everything. Michael was standing near his usual post by the main entrance when he noticed a commotion outside. The automatic doors were acting up again. They'd been glitchy all week, opening and closing at random intervals. Maintenance had been called, but they hadn't fixed the issue yet. Through the glass, he could see someone in a wheelchair struggling with the malfunctioning doors. Other shoppers walked past, some throwing sympathetic glances but none stopping to help. Michael watched for a moment, his grandmother's words echoing in his head. He knew he wasn't supposed to leave his post. It was one of the main rules. The last time he'd stepped away, Mr. Wilson had given him a formal warning. But as he watched the person outside struggling, dignity and basic human decency won out over protocol. Michael made his decision. He radioed in to let Central Security know he needed to step away briefly, then walked toward the doors. He didn't realize it then, but those few steps would set in motion events that would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others. What happened next would spark outrage, inspire a community, and force people to question what matters more, following rules or helping those in need. But in that moment, all Michael knew was that someone needed help, and he could provide it. Sometimes the simplest choices have the most profound consequences.